So 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple is a sequel to 28 Years Later. But this one, even though it's written by Alex Garland, just like the previous film, this movie is actually directed by Nia DaCosta. Taking over the reins from Danny Boyle. And DaCosta's direction I really like, because like she does give a much different style and tone. Like in 28 Years Later, it felt like Danny Boyle was just like wildly experimenting, like, and it was erratic. Like he had, like, cameras zipping around following fast-paced infected, zombie action. And then he would have like slower moments when they got into Ray Fiennes' character, and then it would just go into like just wild offbeat moments with like the giant naked alpha with his penis swinging around, and and Jack O'Connell as showing up as like the member of this weird blonde wig wearing cult that was kind of like a bookend for like the film, for how it like tries to connect the whole film. So it was very wild, very offbeat. It took a lot of like wild risks, and DaCosta's direction, I think, is a little more grounded. And I kind of want to watch my wording there, because like she does stick to, I think, a more cohesive style. She doesn't like try out as much wild camera work as Boyle did, but she still maintains that kind of like experimental tone of trying out a very unpredictable route, trying out different tones, making it very offbeat, making it very I've seen a lot of people refer to this in their reviews, and I think the word fits here, which is gnarly, which is just, like another way of just saying it's like, it's very gross, it's very violent, and it's very vicious at times. And just the way that DaCosta can play around with this material, I think works really well. Because like, for starters, 28 Years Later, it ended on a very odd note, because it involved the young Spike, played by Alfie Williams, had just escaped, his colony where, his father abused him and he lost his mother. So he just sets out into the wilderness on his own. But unfortunately, he runs across But unfortunately for him, he runs across this violent gang called the Jimmies, who are run by Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal, played by Jack O'Connell, who is just such an amazing. I mean, O'Connell, his work in Sinners was great, but here, like, he's just like this vicious, cackling, hysterical, hypocritical type of psychopath who has kind of modeled this entire gang based on childhood. Because like you look at like the wigs, and it took me a moment to connect it, but I was like, okay, everyone's called Jimmy and they have like these blonde wigs. Like, is this supposed to be like Jimmy Savile? Like the old British entertainers, like it, and it was, and I think it stuck for me once they started talking about Teletubbies, which would be like a more firmer connection to like 28 Years Later, because they did show the children watching Teletubbies trying to distract themselves from all the violence. So that kind of connects there. And that's one story. You have Spike, being basically taken in and trying to be inducted by the Jimmies, and the Jimmies are just, they're violent. I mean, well, for one, they're Satanists, so they're all under the assumption that Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal can somehow speak to the devil and can tell them what to do, and engages in all these violent satanic rituals where they just chop up bodies and skin people alive, and are just very nasty, vicious people. So you really do feel for Spike and his fear here. And the other story that we follow here is with Ray Fiennes' character, the returning Dr. Ian Kelson. Now, Kelson was setting, you might remember him from the previous film. He had his whole kind of a tribute to the dead, where he would stack up like the femurs and the skulls to make these giant pillars, while he was also like studying the infected and trying to basically try to find a way to keep on living. And he had this very like chipper tone to him, where you felt like he was still trying to fight off madness, and you do see a lot more of that in this film. I love that there are a lot more quiet moments with Ian, who is he's just like trying to find stuff to do. Like he's studying, he keeps tending to his temple, where he skins off bones, and it feels like it's just like a dreary day-to-day type of ordeal. But once he starts connecting with the prime alpha that he dubs Samson, played by Chi Lewis Perry, he becomes a little bit fascinated with Samson. They establish that he can calm down Samson, but he figures, like, there's no use. I can slow his rage, but I can't. I'm not having any developments here. But the more that he starts hanging out with Samson and just kind of even just like using him for ridiculous stuff, like dancing and just having like a companion to talk to, he starts seeing a little bit more of that intelligence come through Samson. So there's a little bit of like that aspect of kind of like Day of the Dead, where they're trying to like study the infected and maybe think that there's a cure for them. So it gives Ian a lot more to do. It gives him a little bit more hope about trying to like find something worth preserving in this world. Which I think he wants more than anything else. The other thing to note about Ian too, which I thought was kind of going to cross over a bit more with the Jimmies, was that Ian is very obsessed with kind of with classic with classic vinyl. Like, he spends his evenings below ground just playing all these classic records. And there's like a lot of like familiar hits from the 80s that he plays, and at one point he uses his music to dance with Samson, which is like, it's ridiculous, but you know what, for a film like this that wants to experiment, I was fine with that. It's silly and it's very offbeat and bizarre that he's dancing around with this naked zombie, but you know what, it's a weird zombie film, and I love that for this picture. But the obsession that Ian has with classic music, I thought was going to parallel a little bit more with like Jimmy's obsession with like the Teletubbies and Jimmy Seville kind of coding their own satanic religion. But thankfully, the film never becomes that simple, because like I think like right there's enough to draw from. Like, there's some nostalgia there, and how that nostalgia can be wielded for darker means, as with Jimmy, or for trying to improve the world, as Ian is trying to do. And I thought they were going to clash on that, but not quite. I think because the film is trying out so much stuff, it never truly settles on a theme where it becomes predictable. Because at one point I feared that was going to happen, because when we get to the inevitable moment where Ian and Jimmy both meet each other, they kind of spell it out very easily, which is that Jimmy is a Satanist, and Ian is an atheist. So you think that, okay, I get it. Are they going to have like some spiritual debate here? But not quite. And I think it helps with the types of characters they establish, where it never feels like they are going to have that conversation, because Jimmy is just very manipulative and insecure and psychopathic, whereas Ian is a little bit more quiet and delivers kind of like more simplistic responses, even though he has like a wonderful vocabulary. He chooses his words very wisely, so he doesn't kind of like drone on with like philosophical passages as you might expect him to. And you get the feeling that he'd want to, like, with his background and his need to just speak with someone. You'd think he'd want to engage in a more thorough debate, but you kind of see that how that madness of this lifestyle has kind of like drained him a bit. Like, you can see like very faint memories of his past that he's kind of like slowly recalls. And even with Samson, as they slowly start to establish him as a character that you care a little bit more about, you do see flashes of his old reality too. So the film never quite just lands on like one of those themes. It kind of just plays around with all of them. Just says, okay, maybe you could do something interesting here, and then what if we tried out this type of style, or what if we had this type of development, and it has like this unpredictable nature to it that made me love 28 Years Later as well. I know a lot of people were divided on how offbeat and how wildly tonal it was. I think those types of audiences might like Bone Temple more, because there is a more consistent style and tone to it, as opposed to Boyle's film. But at the same time, it does get pretty wild and gruesome at times. Like, there's a scene in a barn where the Jimmies have kind of cornered this group of people, and they just brutalize them in a way that makes you want to sympathize with Spike when he runs out of the barn throwing up, because they they just gut these people. Like they cut off their skin and just torture them, and at one point, like, pretty much just sexually molest one of them at one point. It is pretty damn gruesome, and I was honestly not expecting the film to go that far with a lot of that carnage, but it did, and it's like, and it's gross and it's vile, and I'm like, wow, why am I? How did a film this big get that? And it's like, and I'm happy for the film, like, but I'm also like grossed out as well. But that's what I want out of horror. I want to feel like scared and gross, and just like look at the screen at something that is horrific, and this very much did it for me as someone who has seen a lot of horror films. But then also there are a lot of moments where the film gets really playful, like I guess there's no other way to describe it. Let's just put it this way. There is a scene where Ralph Fiennes dresses up as a Satanist and then sets like a ring of fire around his bone temple and dances around while singing to Iron Maiden. And and at that point in the film, I was just like, okay, yeah, this tracks, and this is actually pretty wild and fun, and I'm actually kind of digging it, while still actually caring for the characters. Where it's not quite a horror comedy, but when it finds like those moments of just like gleeful experimentation, Nia DaCosta really does take advantage of that here, and I'm so happy that she does, because it always feels like she's trying to go very strong with this material, where if you're seeing scenes of people being tortured, it's not easy to digest, and it's not like kept off screen. You see all like the grittiness of it, and you're and the vile nature of it, and you're just grossed out by it. And in scenes where like Ralph Fiennes is trying to play up being a Satanist, he goes for it. Because when I say dance around, I don't just mean he does a little jig and just does some karaoke. I mean, like, he's full-throated singing while leaping on top of like his mountain of skulls, just putting on like this huge performance that honestly, by the time he got to the end of it, I just wanted to clap. It was just so just the fact that Nia DaCosta was able to do that in this type of film, I think really works. Now it might turn off some people if you don't like that kind of offbeat nature here, but after so many zombie films where it just feels like they all kind of like settle on a general thematic core and just kind of like fall back on the gruesome violence and don't really explore any of the other aspects or corners of this world, or some of the fascinating stuff that you could do with zombies or with cults that would crop up in this environment, this film just keeps trying to find new stuff to do. There is a moment where the film kind of like wraps itself up back around to 28 days later by trying to, make it feel like this whole world is connected, and it doesn't feel like it's out of place. It does feel like DaCosta is just trying stuff out and not just falling back on either nostalgia or the spirituality angle, or the dark memories, and just making you care about these characters, but also wanting to see what other bizarre stuff that they can do. Like, I was fascinated with how much I cared for the character of Samson, this guy who, the first time you see him in this film, he is ripping a head right out of the body and just pulling out the spine. And yet, as the film progresses, you start feeling for this guy a little bit, and the film works for it. And I think it's just, it's fun, it's fascinating, it's trying out new stuff. It never becomes bland and predictable, and it's just, and we really need that in the zombie genre. It's so easy to just fall back on just, all the violence and the grotesqueness and just kind of call it a day and just fall back on all the action. And this film doesn't. It feels like it's actually trying new stuff out, and you care for Spike, you care for Ian, and you kind of understand a little bit of the psychopathic nature of Jimmy as the film goes along. While never like losing sight of him. Like, he's clearly the antagonist. There's never a moment where you feel for his plight, especially where it feels like they could set up for that with how 28 years later started with that character. But for all the material that's used here, and for DaCosta's style, which I think works really well, I was surprised by how much I really loved the Bone Temple for being a direct and very, very quick sequel to 28 years later. I I think it really works, and I think it makes me kind of a little bit more excited to see what other directors could do with this, if they could maintain that similar level of experimentation and that offbeat nature and just and exploring and just trying new stuff. Because I think that's what made me so excited for the Bone Temples, that 28 years later tried out so much fun stuff, and I was curious to see if the sequel would as well, and sure enough, it does. And I got, and just, the whole scene of Ray Fiennes dancing around to Iron Maiden, I think is probably a pretty damn good selling point. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with the Bone Temple.